Good morning, everyone. President Tepper, faculty, friends, family, and most of all, the class of 1975, who've returned to the Hill one more time to celebrate, reminisce, and renew. I'm honored to deliver the Annalist Letter for our class, and I've had a lot of help from my friends Kevin McTurnan and Bill Hook, and I'd like you guys to both stand and be recognized. I want to thank the reunion committee, as well as Jeremy Katz, the college archivist, and Victoria Kidd, Jackie Jones, and Jess Jazolinsky of the college's alumni office. Thanks to everyone who answered the reunion surveys, and a special thanks to my creative writing professor, John O'Neill, who gave me a reality check on some recollections and is here today with his wife, Mary. What is an annalist, anyway? The first annalists were ancient Roman historians. They recounted a leader's reign year by year by year, hence the word annales, although I never took Latin. There'll be a little Latin in my speech today. It seems a boring way to recount the past. Julius Caesar was his own annalist. It said he wrote his own annals to extol his triumphs and excuse his blunders. Now that sounds more about right. To begin, I'd like everyone to consider one of these. We all have them. We're joined at the hip. Well, most of us do. But try to remember a time when we didn't have at hand a telephone, a camera, a computer, a broadcast operation, because that time was our time on College Hill. We weren't connected the way we are today, the way students are today, by a web of alerts and texts and posts, but we were all tied together, all the same, because on this hill we lived and learned and played together. There were no words stored in clouds. We held words in our hands. We folded words. We shoved them in our pockets and pounded them out on typewriters. We scratched them out with pens and pencils. We didn't delete them. We erased them with rubber and whiteout. We wrote letters home to our parents, and in the beginning, to high school sweethearts. And if we wanted a ride home one weekend, we posted a note on the bulletin board in the Bristol mailroom or in the McEwen dining hall and hoped someone with a car was headed our way. If we were looking for someone, we'd call his room. If he was one of the few with a phone, it wasn't cheap, or we'd call the lobby phone on the chance that someone picked up and shouted down the hall for an answer, or we'd just go looking for him. Before Spotify and Apple Music, we owned milk crates of LPs. We had stereos the size of a mini fridge. And on a warm spring day, after the snow had long gone, or so we thought, we put them in the windows to share music, Loggins and Messina, Grateful Dead, the Moody Blues, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Or if you had taken music 11, 12 from Professor Bonta, you might have played Beethoven's Pastoral or Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. No one had earbuds and walked around in sonal solitude. The music mixed with the breeze and the smell of pot. The passing cars, the shouts of frisbee-playing loons. For those of us who weren't here, the loons weren't birds. They were some of our more free-flying classmates, or should I say high-flying classmates. When something happened, we talked about it. We wrote about it. Rarely was there a camera to capture it. We had no social media sites to post to and garner clicks and likes. Most of those moments are found only in our memory, perhaps a file in the college archives, certainly not in the internet, preserved for all and forever. But some memories are very strong. We can all remember when a Kirkland student streaked through the chapel, coming right through those doors, up here and out the door. Or when a group of naked Hamilton men rode bicycles around the quad. Ouch. We got news from the Spectator. Watch out, that's digitized now. And we learned about coming events at weekly chapel. Some of us put on skits. Bob Halligan and Dave Duggan shared their take on the campus news. We got population centers from Dow Brophy. We called him the Condom King. Some of us wonder, who are those guys who were getting all those condoms? We wrote checks and used cash. Remember cash? When we needed more cash, we went to Buttrick and cashed checks. Or we went down to Clinton to the Hayes National Bank, where many of us got our first checkbooks. Personal computers were no such thing. Microsoft was founded just 2 months before we graduated. Apple Computer was founded a year after that. Texas Instruments introduced the first handheld calculator the end of our freshman year, and we know some guys who might have bought them. They cost a lot of money then. Hamilton had no computer center until 1974, led by math professor David Smallin. It was tucked away in Burke's library basement. Few humanities majors got near the thing. We went to college in the age of Smith Corona, Underwood, Remington, and for those with a dash of style, Olivetti. Some of us even had electric typewriters. It was in that analog age that we arrived on the Hill in September 1971. We came from different directions. Some might have taken Amtrak or Mohawk Airlines, but many of us came by the Thruway, from the Westmoreland exit down 233 until it turns into Bristol Road. The drive was just about 10 minutes, but it always felt longer. Almost there, but not yet. Until the corner and right turn on College Hill Road, and as the car downshifts and groans up the hill, past the stone shed, Bundy, Sayu, Kaisai, we knew we arrived on the most picture-perfect campus there is. In September 1971, the journey was filled with what-ifs, will-I's, can-I's. But we knew this was where we belonged. Hamilton was it. This was where we wanted to be, until Dunham. What Professor Thomas Johnston called the triumph of economy over the imagination. 240 young men crammed into cinder block suites. Some freshmen our year were selected for Dunham. They were housed in South Dorm, including the three of us, Bill, Kevin, and I. We had a 2-room suite, a working fireplace, 1 room for studying and relaxing, and 1 room for sleeping. Life at Dunham wasn't so refined. One example, although dogs seemed to run free at Kirkland, pets were not permitted at Hamilton. Yet Dusty Batley adopted a cat and kept a litter box out in the hall at Dunham. Until one day he made a disturbing discovery. Either a lion had escaped from the Utica Zoo to use the kitty's litter box, or a prankish classmate decided to act like a feline and leave a deposit. Dave Brody recalled entering the bathroom at Dunham one night to find a classmate passed out on the floor at the base of a toilet with a pillow under his head. Apparently, the fellow's roommate found him there, and when he wouldn't stir, got a pillow to at least protect his head. The smells weren't sweet, but at least he had a single that night. Jay Emmons called living in Dunham a baptism by fire, but also a lesson in learning to get along with others. John Zeringer, class of '73, who sadly passed away last year, was called NAKE, short for Naked Q Body, because he was locked out of his Dunham room in a state of nature, and the name followed him for 4 years. Other classmates got nicknames: Raldo for John, not Ralph Waldo, Emerson; Wheels for Bill Ferris. Professors and others had nicknames too. Professor David Spoolie Ellis, Coach Von Coach for Coach Manfred von Schiller, and we all remember Dr. Leon Death Rowe of the health center. Most of the nicknames we gave out were fine, others not so much, and I won't mention those. Let's just say we were young and unaware. Dorm life wasn't the only adjustment we had to make. We had to adjust to Hamilton's academic rigor. In high school, we were not all good looking, but we were all above average. Our median SATs were 630 verbal and 660 math. Hamilton turned away 2 out of 3 applicants. Not as competitive as it is today, but it was pretty competitive back then. There were nearly 1,400 applicants, which was a new college record at the time. Almost 9 out of 10 of us were from public high schools and finished in the top 5th of our class. Yet for the first time in our high-achieving lives, we learned that success was not preordained. Dave Gilmore recalls that in freshman orientation, a dean delivered this self-evident fact: 50% of you are going to be in the bottom half of your class. We didn't have to be future math majors to get the point. We soon learned that our professors are what made Hamilton special. They chose Hamilton because of their love of teaching, and we chose Hamilton because we wanted that love. Some of it was tough love. The most beloved professors were some of the most demanding. They had high expectations. That's what Andy Sobel, now a professor himself, recalled about Jean Lewis, who introduced him to modern social science. Peter Regan recalled that Ivan Markey was awesome despite his, let's say, I can call it his candor. But their love of the subject ran deep. Dan Trackman remembers that Professor George Nesbitt, who retired after our freshman year, returned to teach an English course. Dan wrote, "At the end of the course, he read us the last few lines of John Milton's Lycidas, and Professor Nesbitt wept. We were a little bewildered, but now we understand." Peter Regan recalled Professor Edwin Barrett crying while explaining Shakespeare's genius, and Professor Bonta being close to tears when he canceled class because Louis Armstrong had died. Our professors encouraged us to question authority, including them. Professor Bob Simon told us that he once delivered a lecture about the philosophy of science, and he mistakenly referred to the father of modern science as Galileo. Galileo thought this, Galileo wrote that. At the end of the lecture, a student came up to Professor Simon and said, "Professor, I heard you say Galileo, Galileo. I didn't know that all this time I've been mispronouncing it as Galileo." Bob Simon told this story because he encouraged us to challenge him and not assume he had all the answers or the right pronunciation. Our professors taught us to think critically. As Peter Lotto put it, I think the most important lesson was always to ask the question to get to the why, because the what is often obvious. Our professors also knew us more than we knew. Steve Krensky, who went on to be a widely published children's book author, recalls one telling event. He had studied with Natalie Babbitt, the award-winning children's book author and Sam Babbitt's wife, and Steve wanted to pursue a senior independent study in children's book writing with Fred Wagner in the English department. But Steve needed the approval of Professor and English Department Chair Dwight Lindley. Steve had never taken a class from Professor Lindley, never talked to him, had no idea how he would react. But Professor Lindley was old school, Hamilton, 1942, and he could appear severe. Steve saw the professor crossing the quad and decided to approach him with the form he needed signed. "Professor Lindley," he said, "I'm Steve Krensky. I don't know if you know me." Before Steve could get in another word, the professor responded, "Yes, yes, you are the children's book writer." Though Steve would wait until he sold his first book to call himself a children's book writer, the professor's simple remark was encouraging and affirming. Steve had an identity to a professor he never met, and that was Hamilton in a nutshell. Our professors got to know us and let us get to know them. The surveys are full of stories of professors who encouraged us and set us on a path. Bob Evans and Lou Pasilio, who went on to be physicians, recall the influence of Professor of Chemistry Robin Kimmel. Professor Sid Wertimer, who somehow knew us all by name the day we walked onto campus, sparked Stuart Lindsay's interest in business. In addition to those already mentioned, we recall the impact made by Fred Wagner, Austin Briggs. John O'Neill was mentioned many times. Otto Liedtke, David Price, Doug Raybeck, Grant Jones and Don Grayson, Jay Williams, E.B. Lee, John Vaughn, Rand Carter, Warren Wright and Leif Todd, Channing Richardson, Duncan Chicoine, and Kirkland professors Stuart Liebman, Buddy Paluski, Nat Boxer, and Stephen Lippman. The list is long because the faculty was deep. And if more alums had answered the survey, I'm sure the list would be twice as long. And some Hamilton people who made a difference were not faculty at all. Kevin McTurnan recalls the influence of Father Paul Drobin, the Catholic chaplain our junior and senior years. Kevin wrote, he was a kind and fun guy who offered a non-judgmental invitation to explore the life of the Spirit. Our professors helped us find our strengths, to find our calling. Bob Halligan arrived at Hamilton thinking pre-law, and we are all thankful that he took a different path and gave us the music we all enjoy. Finding our strengths sometimes meant recognizing our weaknesses. John Emerson came to Hamilton planning to major in science, but he recounted recently that when his unknown specimen in biology died, he had second thoughts and turned to philosophy. He studied with Professor Blackwood and Bowie and Simon, and he studied German history with Professor Michael Halsell. John went on to a career in law, finance, and government, most notably as an assistant to President Clinton and ambassador to Germany under President Obama. And John's connection to Professor Halsell continued long after Hamilton. After the professor left the college, he hosted John when he toured Germany after graduating. And when John was ambassador years later, he hosted the former professor at the ambassador's residence. And John's experience was not unique. Ben Ostrov, who became a political scientist and China scholar, had a lifelong friendship with Pete Suttmeyer, who wrote a foreword to Ben's book and helped Ben land a visiting professorship at the University of Oregon, where Pete later chaired the poli-sci department. And Michael Horn developed a lasting friendship with Professor George Guscheider after assisting the professor on the first draft of his textbook. We came to Hamilton during a transitional period for the college. There were endings and new beginnings. The faculty received a wave of young professors. I mentioned Professor O'Neill, Pete Suttmeyer, Michael Halsell, there was Derek Jones, just to name a few. They sometimes seem to be more our contemporaries than the senior faculties, and it's not just because we might see them at the pub. They related to us and we to them in a way that the senior faculty could not. And as the new professors arrived, some longtime faculty retired. Thomas Johnston and George Nesbitt from the English department and George Cameron from the physics department. In the administration, we began with Dean Winton Tolles. I can still picture him, rumpled suit, cigarette hanging from his lips, wry smile. Our freshman year ended his 25-year run. He embodied an era at Hamilton. He was succeeded by Dean Stephen Kurtz and Dean of Students Gordon Bingham. Then Professor Lindley followed Dean Kurtz after he resigned in our junior year to lead Exeter. We started with John Wesley Chandler as president. An alum of Williams, he resigned in the spring of our sophomore year to take the presidency there. Who can forget that touching moment when the vacationing President Chandler announced he was leaving us by a cassette-recorded message in the chapel? There it was. Talk about phoning it in. The college's search for a successor led to the Joseph Sisko fiasco. Sisko accepted Hamilton's offer on December 8, 1973, and then withdrew his acceptance on January 7th, after Henry Kissinger offered him a promotion at the State Department. Even William Henry Harrison held the U.S. presidency longer than Joe Sisko held Hamilton's. And Harrison had a good excuse. He died of pneumonia 31 days after inauguration. Eventually, the college looked within, and in April, selected Provost and Acting President J. Martin Caravano, who led the college for 14 years. There's a story that goes with the Cisco search. The search committee worked in secret, and some were unhappy with that and how the search was going. One insider leaked Cisco's name to the Spectator's editor-in-chief, Fred Block, and an administrator, perhaps accidentally, but I think likely on purpose, left sitting on his desk a search committee memo with another candidate's name, a dean at Dartmouth, during a meeting with Spectator editor Henry Glick. Henry was adept at reading upside down, a skill with few uses as a PhD and professor at Penn Medical, but handy then. The Spectator broke the news about the two candidates, and Acting President Caravano and Trustee Board Chairman Coleman Burke were irate, and the Student Senate even censured the newspaper. They believed the paper had a duty to withhold the information to support the college and shield the candidates, and the Spectator believed its duty was to publish because the college community had a right to know, and informing the public ultimately served the college. And so we echoed in a small way the debate often repeated on the national stage when journalists decide the benefits of informing the public versus the risks of disclosure. And in the end, the college still got its man, that is, until he left. The college also changed physically during our days on the Hill, and those changes seem very modest against the impressive building we've observed during our weekend here. But they meant something to us. We began our studies in the James Library with its dusty stacks and hidden corners and its cathedral-like reading room, and we moved in our sophomore year to the gleaming new Daniel Burke Library. It had big, cushy chairs on the second floor that invited napping more than reading. We'd spent frazzled hours working in the 24-hour reading room, trying to finish a paper or study for an exam, while carefree classmates stumbled by the giant windows on their way to bed. When we arrived, the distinctive red shale walk still tied the campus together, but the budget-minded college gradually replaced them with asphalt. The early 1970s were tough times for the economy. We had recession, inflation, OPEC's oil embargo. The endowment dropped from $27.6 million before we arrived to $26.5 million when we left. Imagine. Now it's well over $1 billion, thanks to the generosity of alumni and friends and good sound management. Our years were Kirkland's heyday. It had opened just 3 years before we arrived, but it was up and running, and we had no inkling of what would come just a few years after we graduated. We were Hamilton's 159th entering class, and our Kirkland classmates were their college's 4th. Hamilton followed traditions, but Kirkland was making new ones. It expanded the curriculum in the arts, social sciences, and humanities, but most of all to us, Kirkland College meant we would share our college years with women. But this was not just any group of women. They chose a school that was just making its mark. They were risk takers, academic adventurers, and they were feminists who raised our consciousness every day, or they tried. For most of us, I think Hamilton without Kirkland was not a college we would have attended. We also arrived during a transitional period in our nation. The Vietnam War was still dragging on, and we still had the wartime draft. In September of our freshman year, President Nixon signed legislation ending student deferments. The following February, we gathered in Bristol Campus Center to hear the dates and lottery numbers for us 1953 babies. Those with low numbers went to physicals in Syracuse and other places. Induction would come the following year. But the Paris Peace Accords were signed in January 1973, and we were spared. 1952 babies were the last ones called. We honor the service and sacrifice of our classmates and those before and after us who volunteered to serve or who answered the call to serve. Mark Fox was one of them, who enlisted in the Navy and returned to graduate with the class of 1977. Bill Hook recalls playing on the football team with Vietnam veterans Mac Abbey and John Bush. Bill recalls, "We were boys, but they were men." Politics did not consume the campus the way it had in the 1960s, but the 1972 presidential campaign was the first for 18-year-old voters. Hamilton students backed McGovern over Nixon 3-1. Some of us knocked on doors of registered Democrats in Clinton to get out the vote. It took a lot of walking. The Hill was a blue boat bobbing in a red ocean. During our years at Hamilton, we saw Nixon's re-election and then his downfall. Major players on the national and world stage came to Alumni Gym or the chapel to bring the outside world into our world. We heard from Congresswoman and presidential candidate Shirley Chisholm, former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and Israeli diplomat and former Foreign Minister Abba Eban. The college bestowed honorary degrees on notables like civil rights leader Vernon Jordan, path-breaking Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, entertainer Danny Kaye, and at our graduation to the then UN Secretary General and future Austrian President Kurt Waldheim, who it was later revealed was complicit in Nazi war crimes and barred from the US. So not all Hamilton's choices withstood the test of time. Into our protected bubble, tragedy sometimes tore a hole. Jonathan Martyr and the class behind us took his own life on campus. A prize for excellence in psychology honors his memory, and Michael Horn was the first recipient. On the way home for Thanksgiving break junior year, Doug McDevitt was killed by a passing tractor trailer. Doug had stopped to help a motorist in distress. He was that kind of guy. He was also a star swimmer. The Upper New York State Collegiate Swimming Association honors his memory with an annual award, and Doug's teammate Jeff Carlberg was fittingly the first recipient. Amid the many transitions, some things remained remarkably unchanged. Like those who came before us, we were a class of men taught by men. There were just a few women on Hamilton's faculty, and the college tried with little success to recruit black faculty. One professor called the effort a failure of imagination. Our class was overwhelmingly white. 2/3 of our class came from New York State. Back then, diversity meant mixing a straight white man from Scarsdale with a straight white male from Skaneateles. Our gay classmates did not disclose their orientation. Our black and Latino classmates were few in number. A history course titled "The Black Man in America" had to be taught by a white man. No criticism of Professor Millar intended. Yet our classmates of color found camaraderie and support in the Afro-Latin Cultural Center, made music in the Uhuru Ensemble, and celebrated black and Latin music and art in annual festivals. But they surely faced and overcame challenges the rest of us did not. Campus life was still closely tied to fraternities, though roughly half the freshmen did not join them. Those who did had a chance to practice leadership, to live cooperatively, to strengthen friendships, and to party. House parties were still a big deal every fall, winter, and spring. They were often open to all. Independents were sometimes charged admission, but Kirkland students almost never. Theta Delta's Beggar's Banquet featured a medieval feast of roasted turkeys eaten without the benefit of forks, knives, plates, or napkins. Other parties had different themes. There were the ever-popular beer and bands, often offered at AD, DU, ELS, SIU, TEAC, and Sigma Phi, and who can forget the gin and juice. One weekend, you could hit a beer and band at ELS Friday night, wake up on Saturday morning, and drink gin and juice at Chi Psi starting at 10:30 in the morning. You could keep drinking beer at the beer and bands all that night, wake up Sunday, late of course, and drink more gin and juice on the Sig lawn, courtesy of Sigma Phi and DEAC. In those days, we drank a lot of fruit juice and alcohol. Perhaps too much. The 18-year drinking age made it easy. So did the Matt Brewing Company when it gave us its new high-alcohol brew, Maximus Super. Its appeal was not its taste. Marijuana was popular too, and some classmates experimented with psychedelics. We enjoyed alcohol-free entertainment at the Kirkland Coffee House. We listened to WHCL, and each week the Film Societies showed classic movies and foreign films at the Chemistry and Science auditoriums. It cost 75 cents. They showed everything from Ingmar Bergman and Francois Truffaut to Reefer Madness and Betty Boop. The latter two were a lot more entertaining if you were high, or so I've heard. Most of us rarely left the Hill, except for jaunts to the cider mill and the bakery in the early morning hours for pastries still warm from the oven. We went to Don's Rock, and if our parents were visiting or we had a big date, to Altieri's or the Alham Inn. Excuse me. And we took the occasional trip to Utica to tour the brewery and get samples, or to view art at the Munson Williams Proctor's Institute, but usually not on the same day. Live musicians came to the Hill and covered all the genres. We heard jazz greats Freddie Hubbard, Herbie Hancock, modern jazz quartet, Chick Corea, and Return to Forever. We enjoyed John Prine, Happy and Artie Traum, Orleans, Billy Cobham, Grover Washington Jr., Eddie Kendricks, and Taj Mahal. We also heard the Eastman String Quartet and the Buffalo Philharmonic. In 1971, the college helped form NESCAC, the New England Small College Athletic Conference, which shared the college's commitment to academic excellence. Some schools talk about scholar athletes, but at Hamilton they were real. We may recall that the football team had rough going during our 4 years. They won 2 out of 31 games and were winless 2 years straight. And there was turmoil with the coach. And the Aaron Burr Lucky Shot marching kazoo band marched around the field during their halftimes. Yet the football team, the members of that football team spent countless hours on practice and travel and games. Why? Why did they do that? Well, actually it wasn't supposed to be a laugh line, but it's all right. But they did it because they valued the competition and the challenge and the team building and the teamwork. They played for the love of the sport. Right? Now, not all the teams had the football team's difficulties. Other teams enjoyed greater success. Greg Batt's hockey team thrived. The unheated Sage Rink was often packed with fans. We stood in the cold watching the hockey team. Some said we were ill-mannered watching the hockey games. I prefer the word passionate. Senior year, the team went 17-8-1 and skated to the ECAC East-West Finals. Basketball under Tom Murphy made it to the semifinals in the ECAC, a precursor to its championship seasons after we graduated. Hamilton swimming, coached by Eric McDonald, was top-notch our years, and Jeff Carlberg, who went on to become a physician, won 2 NCAA championships in breaststroke and made it into Sports Illustrated's Faces in the Crowd feature. The cross-country team, coached by Gene Long, won 28 straight meets. Other classmates competed in soccer, golf, tennis, lacrosse, track, and baseball. There were some junior varsity teams and intramural teams, and jungle hockey. Lou Pacilio described the life lessons he learned from athletics at Hamilton, especially from Coach Long. Lou wrote, "Gene Long taught us much more than how to compete and improve athletically. We learned how to meld as a team and support each other while sensing each other's needs, strengths, and weaknesses." Lou wrote that his coach taught mindfulness well before it became popular, and how to relax under extreme fatigue and stress, something, I guess, valuable to a future doctor. He also taught moderation and to be mindful of doing something to excess. That's what Hamilton athletes at Hamilton is all about: a healthy mind and a healthy body. Arts and music also thrived. Steak night rocked. A committed and enthusiastic group also sang in the Hamilton Kirkland Choir, impressing audiences not just on the Hill, but in Europe and at New York City's Town Hall. James Fankhauser is fondly remembered by the singers he led, and the Charlatans put on plays. But lots of us wrote poetry and stories. We painted and sculpted, danced. We did photography. As Peter Arturi recalled of Professor Paluski, he gave me the freedom to explore an artsy side of me that I never knew existed. Some in our class made a career of performing in the arts. To name a few: Bob Halligan and Jeb Guthrie in music, Ray Dooley in drama. Joe Lewis published books, recorded music, and made art hung in galleries far and wide. But for most of us, finding and feeding our artistic impulse was not our calling. But it still made us see the world differently. It gave us a lifelong appreciation of the arts, and it made us sharper thinkers, clearer writers, and more confident speakers. We're gathered here this weekend for many reasons, but one reason is almost too obvious to mention, but I'm going to mention it anyway. We're here now because we arrived here 54 years ago. Almost 54 years ago, anyway. At the outset of my remarks, I talk about taking the road to Hamilton back in September 1971. In Robert Frost's well-known poem, The Road Not Taken, a young narrator tells us about a fateful choice. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair. And the traveler predicts how he'll describe that choice years later in familiar lines. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. But wait, the young traveler had earlier told us that the two roads were not that different at all. The poem says the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. He took the other as just as fair as the other one. So what's going on? The young speaker thinks that in old age he will have to delude himself about the choices he made as a young man. Now we're getting to know something about old age. And we know better than that young traveler about choices made and roads not taken. And we suffer no delusions. Yes, we took the road to Hamilton, but it was not our choosing that made the difference. It was Hamilton. Hamilton in all its facets: the professors, the lessons learned, the friendships formed. Hamilton made all the difference. And for that, we are all grateful. Thank you.